My Hero Academia Heroes Rising, a movie that goes out of its way to show how far our characters have actually developed through the show and takes the story and pretty much leaves it exactly where we left off with the show. I kind of feel like that's a bit much to say at the start of a review, but I do have a lot more to talk about, so without further ado, let's get into my review of My Hero Academia Heroes Rising, the movie. Now, this review is going to cover four main things. We're going to cover the visuals, my favorite part. We're going to cover the cast and the acting, both in Japanese and English. We're going to cover the actual character development and the way they were written, and the story as a whole. So, now that we got a general roadmap, let's start with my favorite, the visuals. The visuals in this movie, in my opinion, are amazing. I have reasons to say they're amazing, so let me get into those before you skip the visuals portion, but they're great. I love it. The fact that this is a movie with a movie budget means that we actually have more than just incredible fight scenes, but also just little instances of polish throughout the entire movie that just make this movie feel more engaging and more dynamic. The biggest one that I noticed was the way that they played with lighting, especially when they're on the island, because one of the things that you may not notice a lot with anime is that unless there's a big emotional moment in a show, the lighting tends to be sort of one of two things, either very bright or evenly lit would be more realistic, or dark. And that's about it. And you generally get sort of a spread between those depending on the brightness of the scene, but you usually don't get a whole lot of things like context shadows or lighting from the front and shadows on the back. They only really use those effects when it's necessary, and even then they don't move too much. But one of the things they really played with in this movie is the lighting for sunsets, for the lighting on Deku actually looked somewhat different, and of course just that little extra polish with things like explosions and, of course, movement. And there are other little things here and there, like the effect that they use for Nine when he's stealing a quirk. You actually get this really cool sort of CG mist effect, which I'm sure they would have pulled off fine in the show, considering that that would have been a big moment, but it just has that little extra bit of polish that I feel like only shows up in movies. Speaking of Nine, his dragon tentacle effect thing and the storm effects that he uses both get a ton more polish than what you would have ever seen in a TV show, so thumbs up for that. And of course, my favorite moment, which is going to be a spoiler, so you have been warned, Deku and Bakugo versus Nine himself. Holy crap. I have watched this fight 3 times, and I still can't watch it objectively because I just get so sucked into the visuals and the meaning of it in the story. All these things just are, oh god, it's so cool. I'm going off script. I need to get back to the script. This fight not only stands to show, obviously, the visual prowess of the animation for this movie, but it also goes to show how much of a struggle our two heroes are going through to actually fight this extremely formidable foe. And it's kind of hard sometimes to show struggle in animation to such a physical degree. You can see facial animations that show that the characters are struggling. You can see battle damage on the characters to show that they're taking damage, but to see them physically struggling in a fight really does take a whole other level. And this moment in particular with Bakugo really drives that home. The way that he is pushing against this rock to push it into Nine, and his feet are slipping, and the animation shows him physically struggling as they're fighting. And that just, that moment for me really did drive home how much they wanted to show you that these characters were struggling to fight against Nine. Of course, I also love the little extra details we get with things like the way Deku fights, where it looks like he's gliding on the electricity from One for All, or another big moment, him just bolting up and attacking Nine. That was so cool. The dynamic camera work, the moving pieces with spinning cameras around stuff moving in the scene, just, I love it. So just realized while editing this, forgot to mention the score, because I wasn't really covering the score, but the sort of heavy action while sort of juxtaposing it with a soft score, the same as what they used with the rescue of Eri during the last season, was amazing. I loved it, so just wanted to throw that in here because my god, was that a really nice touch. Anyway, back to the rest of the rambling. So when it comes to visuals, I give this movie an A+ for visuals. Just, God, it is so good. From the little context to the big stuff, everything gets that extra level of polish, and you can take fight scenes like that to a whole other level. Now, moving on to the casting and acting, it's what I would have expected from what I already got with both the dub and the sub for the TV show, because it's good. It's damn good. And it has been that way for a long time now. And I don't know why people still seem surprised when I say that the dub for My Hero Academia is good, because it is. Let me put it this way. My Hero Academia is one of the shows that is part of, or has been until recently, part of the simuldub sort of thing that Funimation's been doing. And the simuldub has gotten a bad rap, rightly so for a few things, because with the rush to try to produce a dub alongside a sub show, you tend to either cut corners or rush something that ends up giving you a not ideal end result. And we've gotten several not great dubs out of the simulcast sort of stuff. So it's fair to expect that if you've not watched anything from My Hero Academia before, you'd expect the dub to be because it's a simuldub. But this show, in its dub form, seems to be the only show that I've found to stand in contrast to what most people would have expected from a rushed, air quotes, dub setup. And even the new characters that are introduced just for the movie have good actors. Now, I'll probably knock a few points off just because the kid actors, or the adults playing kids, did kind of make it seem a little weird, but it's always that way with dubs, unfortunately. It's just sort of the nature of the beast. But apart from the kids, who do actually play a significant role in the story, so their voices do kind of affect my overall rating, Nine and his band of villains, the actors were amazing for those. And if I hadn't been told, I probably wouldn't have pieced together that Johnny Young Bosch was voicing Nine until the very end when he started yelling, which is when he started sounding like Lelouch. So overall, the English cast was good. I went a little on a tangent for English, but they were good. The sub, just like the dub, is exactly what you'd expect from the show. And for fear of repeating myself, I'm just going to say that if you're a fan of the show, whether you watch it in dub or watch it in sub, both are going to satisfy exactly what you would expect from either camp. So if you're watching the sub, I would encourage giving the dub a shot. And if you are watching exclusively the dub, I'd give the sub a shot. They are both equally amazing, and it's one of the few shows, period, that I've seen where I can hop between both easily. Like, not even Fairy Tail could do that for me. So they're doing something right if even somebody who tends to lean more towards dubs like myself enjoys both. Now, for the first of two big points for me, the characters and their writing. So getting into a little bit of spoilers here, be warned, the whole point of this movie is that the characters are off on an island doing hero work, where they are actually meant to be the heroes for the town, doing regular hero work, running their own agency, for lack of a better term, to get themselves more experience as heroes. And I think that's actually a really cool idea. And from a story perspective, it makes sense. It's actually really cool. But when you kind of step back and look at it, you kind of realize that if they put them on an island, that separates them from pretty much any other part of the story close to UA or any place that might be affected when the show comes back around. Now, don't get me wrong, the set piece is amazing, and it, as I said, serves to really beef up the look of the movie, give these really cool moments with these really neat set pieces. So I'm not going to complain about the setting. And I think that where they are sort of writing the story to be worked. As for the characters, this is where things are pretty interesting. So the writing of the characters between the show and the movie haven't changed, but what the movie stood to do was really drive home how much the writing for the characters has changed in the long term. This is not a movie to develop the characters. This is a movie to show off the development of the characters. And it does an amazing job of doing that. We have little character moments to show growth, like Ida being a little more human, or Todoroki using his fire. Things like that really do show the characters as they've grown, but nothing shows that more than Bakugo. I almost kind of feel like this was his movie in a way, because of the way that they treated him. Bakugo obviously is a very hot-headed character, and from the very start, he was this arrogant, didn't care about anybody but himself, just fighter brute character. And we've seen as things have gone on, he's begun to slowly develop more and more and become rivals with Deku, sort of with a mutual respect, versus just somebody who surely bullies Deku. And obviously he still has a lot of his hot-headed moments, and he definitely still has that fighter instinct, but seeing the way he has developed in terms of being willing to accept, big spoilers here, being willing to accept Deku giving up One for All in order for them to both fight and eventually move all of that power over to Bakugo, really shows his growth as a character in this movie. But that's also where we start to have some issues with showing big character moments. This movie, like I said, stood to show how the characters have changed, not to actually change the characters. But this also really kind of drives one of the problems that I had with the story. The big moment in this story of Bakugo and Deku fighting really does put Bakugo and Deku in an extreme situation. And we already know that Deku as a character has pretty much grown in his strength and abilities, but his morals and his actual character has pretty much stayed the same. Bakugo, on the other hand, has pretty much stayed the same in his powers, but has improved as a character. And this pushes him specifically to an extreme where we see what he would actually do in a crisis situation where there were no other alternatives to winning. And I think that's great, but obviously that can't stand because we know that there's a whole lot more in the manga and the anime before we get to the end of this series, so he forgets everything by the end of the movie.
And One for All doesn't stay with him. Forgot to mention that.
This is all still spoilers, by the way. So we get to sort of see how the character would react in an emergency, which is cool. And we get to see the eye candy of the fight and all of this really awesome development that our characters have seen. But then we as the viewers get to know that, and only us, because Bakugo forgets it in order to save the story and keep it sort of as it should be, as much as I hate that, but you know, it is what it is. It's a movie. And like I said at the start, this movie shows how much our characters have grown while taking the story and leaving it exactly where it is. So let's move on to story, because I'm going to give the character writing a B-. The story as a whole is a little different because this is going to more pertain to Nine and his group and their goals, more so than the characters from Class 1A. Like, Nine is a character, interesting, has his goals, really just stands as a plot device to push our characters into a state where we see how far they've developed. So, story-wise, what does he and his gang do? Well, they want to make a utopia where the powerful lead and the weak are killed off or imprisoned or whatever the case may be. Standard supervillain stuff, same thing that you're trying to get going on with the League of Villains. It's
same old crap.
It's a generic story, but it really does drive a lot for the characters. But Nine himself actually shows some really interesting potential for the show. Not potential for himself, because like the story, he gets kind of erased at the end, so yeah. But what he shows is that this doctor character, who looks a lot like the doctor from the beginning that gave Deku the news that he was not actually going to have a quirk, this guy is implementing experiments on people with quirks, and he was able to allow Nine to harness multiple quirks. And that really does, I guess, change the story to some degree, but I don't know how much they're going to play into that when the actual show picks back up. Because like we already knew that there were characters who could harness multiple quirks, but those usually reared their heads as Nomu. So we kind of had Nine as the first non-affected, at least mentally, character. But the more he used multiple quirks, the more his mental state dropped. You see what I mean? Nothing's really changed. So like I said at the start, this movie really does show our character development. It is amazing how far these characters have come from the start. We've got all these big moments that show how our characters would react in emergency situations, how they handle themselves as heroes, and how they will actually respond, especially with Bakugo, in a desperate fight where we have no other alternative. And I think that's amazing because it really does drive home how much the characters have grown. I feel like I'm repeating myself, but does that make sense? I hope so. The visuals at the end of this movie, which are a spoiler by the way, really do show more than one thing to me, in my opinion, and it's sort of fitting in an ironic way. The ending visuals have Shigaraki and Nine interacting with one another, Nine sort of having served his purpose and Shigaraki decaying him, erasing him. And the story and the points of this story really do sort of go away with the end of this film, because Shigaraki is still the main villain now after we've had All for One locked up. And while Nine and his gang in this movie serve their purpose of really showing us the development of these characters, especially with Bakugo and Deku, they don't serve any more purpose, so we move on to Shigaraki again. I think that's actually really fitting, and I like the way they did that, but it's what kind of gives, for me, the story of this an A-, because I wish they had more story point lasting impacts, but I know that from a character standpoint, that was sort of the driving force to make us emotionally and overall just in an investment way care about these characters more. But to conclude here, because I've been talking long enough, this anime movie is amazing. I really loved it, and I think the closest approximation that I could find for the last time I sort of saw something like this was with the Seven Deadly Sins Signs of Holy War, because those 4 episodes that they did for Seven Deadly Sins really stood to just give us more time with these characters and see how they've grown, but not actually affect the story in any major way. And I think this movie does that perfectly. So overall, I highly recommend this movie. I genuinely enjoyed it. I mean, hell, I bought the Steelbook for it. I love this movie. I've watched it, like I said, 3 times, and I still can't not get emotionally invested in certain points. So hopefully you guys feel the same way. I have nothing else to say. I think that this movie's great. Either way, that's all I've got to say about this movie. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Make sure to like and subscribe. Leave a comment letting me know what you guys thought. And apart from that, I'll see you guys in the next video. Make sure to be there and have a good one.